We've talked about stories from the religion of Islam before in previous episodes, but in this episode, I'll be sharing some familiar stories again, but I'll also be focusing on just prophet stories, and I'll be sharing additional details and some new points that are going to be added in. Hey guys, welcome back to FTD Facts. My name is Leroy Kenton, and I got an exciting episode coming up right now. There's a lot to share, so let's jump right in, and be sure to watch from 10 all the way down to number 1 so you don't miss any of these stories. Starting at number 10, we have the prophet Adam. I assume most of us are familiar with the story of Adam and Eve who ate the forbidden fruit because of the temptation of the devil. And according to the religion of Islam, when Allah created Adam, Adam sneezed and said, Alhamdulillah, and that means all praises belong to Allah. And then Allah answered and said, Yarhamuk Allah, which means Allah bestows His mercy on you. So Muslims know this and they try to practice praising God after they sneeze. And many Muslims believe that those are the first words that were spoken by human beings. The next story involves the Prophet Muhammad and his intellectual humility. So before a particular military mission to protect the city of Medina from attack, the Prophet Muhammad had consulted his companions about military strategies. Now, at first, he proposed to stay in the city and attack the enemies when they arrived in Medina. But the majority of his companions, they suggested a completely different strategy. Their strategy was to go to the border instead. Now, the Prophet decided to follow his companions instead of following his own inclinations. So in another battle, the Battle of Khandaq, the Prophet Muhammad himself also sought the suggestion of a war strategy that was adopted by the Persians, and he sought this specifically from a Persian man. And Muslims view these examples from the life of the Prophet Muhammad as signs that he was somebody that actually listened to other people to learn knowledge from them. He didn't just go based on what he thought all the time. Next up at number 8, we have the story of the prophet Yunus. Now, the prophet Yunus was sent to preach to the people of Nineveh, and the city became a place filled with idol worship and a whole lot of sin happening every single day. But the people of Nineveh rejected his message, and he left completely sad. He ended up boarding a ship that was on its way to a different city. And once he was at sea, there was a massive storm that started to sink the ship. So the people on the ship, they drew lots, and they drew lots 3 times, and they fell on Yunus as being the person that had to jump overboard. Now, it's said that Allah commanded a big whale to swallow Yunus, and he called upon Allah for help and comfort when he was inside of the belly of the whale. So the whale ended up spitting Yunus on dry land, and after he recovered, he returned to Nineveh, and to his surprise, all the people in the city, they had turned to Allah. The story at number 7 involves the prophet Ayub and his patience. The story of the prophet Ayub's perseverance and patience in dealing with Allah's trials and tribulations that he experienced is one of the many stories that are recorded in the Quran. He was a very righteous man, and he was well respected in society, and he was blessed with health and wealth. But at this particular time, he was hit with a terrible illness for a long period of time, and he lost his family, everybody except his wife. Now, his entire body was completely affected with some sort of disease. And not only that, but here's the thing, he didn't complain or reject his fate that he was suffering. But the Prophet Ayub, he ended up praising Allah with whatever strength he had in his body. Now, one day though, his wife did ask why he wouldn't just beg for relief for his illness, and then he replied to her saying, I live 70 years in prosperity and health. Why shouldn't I be patient for the sake of Allah for 70 years? So as a result of his great perseverance, the Prophet was once again blessed by Allah. His health and his wealth and his children were restored, and he was even granted more in the last part of his life than he had in the first part of his life. This next story involves the Prophet Yusuf. When the Prophet Yusuf was just a child, his brothers, who were very jealous of him, they came up with a plan to get rid of him. So what they ended up doing was that they threw him inside of a well and left him there. So this led to him being completely separated from his father and the rest of his family for many years. He actually ended up becoming a slave in Egypt and also thrown into prison for a crime that he didn't even commit. Now, through constant patience and remembering Allah, eventually he becomes promoted as the new Aziz of Egypt, and he then gets reunited with his brothers who banished him, as well as his father. Very happy ending to that story. And since we're on the topic of talking about stories from the religion of Islam, I do have another recommended video. It's a 3-part series actually, where we talk about surprising stories from the Quran. I have a link below to that in the video description section. You can check it out, watch 1, 2, or 3. I do have to warn you though that those are probably the longest videos that we've ever made here on FTD Facts. So yeah, they're filled with a lot of information. You're gonna enjoy those ones. Story number 5 involves the Prophet Sulaiman and his trials of wealth and worldly success and his wisdom. And one particular case actually involving the Prophet Sulaiman was specifically having to do with his ability of knowing the language of animals. We're not going to talk about his wealth and his riches in this particular episode. But there was at one point, the Prophet Sulaiman had a gathering of his army, as well as his human soldiers and birds and different animals were all marching towards the direction of an ant's nest. But here's the thing, there was an ant that heard that the army was coming, and he knew that they were probably gonna get crushed, as well as all the ants in the nest. So the ant ended up warning all the different other ants in the community, and because like, oh my god, this potential deadly disaster is approaching us. But with the help of Allah, the Prophet Sulaiman actually heard the ants talking and commanded that his army of human soldiers, jinns, and other animals change course so that they can avoid crushing the ants. The story at number 4 is about the Prophet Ibrahim. Now, when the Prophet Ibrahim was sent to be a messenger for his people of his own town, they completely rejected what he had to say, and they continued to carry on with their evil ways and pray to their idols. So once there was an annual feast in the town where the king went out with all of his people to celebrate, and then the Prophet went to the temple to destroy all of the idols except for the largest one. And then when all of the people, they found out what happened, they wanted to punish him by throwing him into the fire. Now, it's said, according to Muslim belief, that when the Prophet was thrown into the fire, he called on Allah. And the blazing fire, right away, it lost all of its heat, and the Prophet Ibrahim came out of the fire with absolutely no burn marks on his skin. He wasn't even in any pain at all. Prophethood comes in at number 3. A very long time ago, there was a pretty popular tribe that lived in the south of Arabia, and they were called Ad. And the city that they inhabited, they called it Iram. But as time went on, the people ended up thinking more about themselves and less about Allah. And before long, they turned to doing a whole lot of evil. But there was still one good man among them, and his name was Hud. And he didn't agree with anything that they were doing at all. He tried to tell them to stop all of their evil ways, and he told them to follow Allah's ways. And Prophet Hud ended up telling them that Allah would punish the bad ones, but most of the people still didn't listen. They thought that they were wiser and more clever than the messenger of Allah, and Allah told the Prophet Hud to take all of the good people into a big cave near the city, and the very next day, a huge powerful tornado came in, destroyed the entire place, and only the people who listened were saved. Story number 2 involves the Prophet Nuh, also known as Noah in English. There's a whole lot of arguing that rose between Noah and the unbelievers of his time. Noah brought up a clear message. It was a warning to the people that disaster was coming. And in the Quran it mentions this, and it says, "And we had certainly sent Noah to his people, saying, Indeed, I am to you a clear warner, that you not worship except Allah. Indeed, I fear for you the punishment of a painful day. So the eminent among those who disbelieved from his people said, We do not see you but as a man like ourselves, and we do not see you followed except by those who are of the lowest of us and at first suggestion. And we do not see in you over us any merit, rather we think you are liars." And that's found in the Quran, Surah 11, verses 25 to 27. And Noah continued to share with them that they would continue to experience the benefits if they turned to God and begged for his forgiveness. However, the disbelievers rejected his words. And as you know, there was a terrible flood that happened. All of them were destroyed. And finally, the story at number 1 in this episode has to do with Miriam. Now, this one is not really a prophet story, but at number 1, we're talking about Miriam, aka Mary, the mother of Isa, aka Jesus. Now, in the Quran, Jesus, by the way, is referred to as Isa ibn Maryam, or Jesus, the son of Mary. Now, in the chapter 19 of the Quran, this is what it has to say. And mention, O Muhammad, in the book, the story of Mary when she withdrew from her family to a place toward the east, and she took in seclusion from them a screen. Then we sent to her our angel, and he represented himself to her as a well-proportioned man. She said, indeed, I seek refuge in the most merciful from you, so leave me if you should be fearing of Allah. He said, I'm only the messenger of your Lord to give you news of a pure boy. She said, how can I have a boy while no man has touched me and I have been unchaste? He said, thus it will be. Your Lord says, it is easy for me, and we will make him a sign to the people and a mercy upon us. And it is a matter already decreed. So she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a remote place. And that's found in the Quran, Surah 19, verses 16 to 22. Then the Quran, from there, it picks up the story at the moment that Mary goes into labor, and when she carried the baby Jesus to her people, they of course questioned her. They were wondering, like, how do you have a baby in your arms? So Jesus actually spoke to answer their question. And the Quran describes that in Surah 19, verses 26 to 33. And that brings us to the end of this episode. That was a brief look at 10 surprising prophet stories in the religion of Islam. Really hope you guys enjoyed this one, and you definitely learned something new. As always, leave your thoughts and comments about anything I shared in this episode down below in the comment section, as well as anything else that you want to share down below. Remember to check out those recommended episodes, and I'll see you guys next time tomorrow in another video. Stay tuned. See you soon.